Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this video I've got my P-Bass out and I want to talk about flatwounds, and in particular how using flats might just be the key to finding all those classic P-Bass tones you're after. So for this video, I've come up with 6 reasons why I think if you've got a P-Bass, you really need to try some flatwounds. So let's get straight in with number 1, which is because they're what P-Basses originally came with. So back in the 50s, when the P-Bass was invented, they all would have had flatwounds as standard. Now in the 60s, roundwounds did gain some popularity, but it wasn't actually until 1983 that Fender started using roundwounds as standard on their basses. So if you go into a shop now and buy a brand new P-Bass, it'll have roundwounds on it. But if you want those original classic sounds, like the old Motown stuff, the Wrecking Crew, all those old soul records, which is what made the P-Bass so famous for that deep sound, then really you do need flatwounds if you want to get that in an authentic way. Now, just in case you're not sure on the difference between roundwounds and flatwounds, then both types of string have an inner core, but with roundwounds they have an outer winding which is round, whereas on flatwounds the outer winding is flat, and this gives them a different type of sound and a different feel. So reason number 2 on my list is the frequency response. So now let's hear a clip of me playing with some brand new roundwounds up against these slightly worn in flatwounds, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So I guess you would have heard a pretty big difference there, but for a moment let's just talk about the design of the P-Bass and how that influences the sound. So you've got this one split coil pickup right in the middle here, and what this does is give a lot of the highs like a single coil, but a lot of lows like a humbucker, and it just has a massive frequency response. And with roundwounds on, you get all of that information come through, all of those highs and all of those lows. Now with flats, what it actually does is narrow that frequency range in a bit to focus more on the mids and those lower mids. And whilst you might think that's a negative, that you're losing some of the frequency range, actually, once you get into a mix, that's really useful for the bass to find its own place. So on all those old Motown records where you really hear a lot of bass, there's actually a ton of other instruments going on, strings, brass, pianos, organs, backing vocals, but the bass still comes through really strongly, and that's because the frequency is really pinpointed to stand out in the mix, and that's one of the huge benefits of using flats. So on to the third thing on my list, and that's the feel and tension. So flatwounds do have more tension in them than roundwounds, i.e. they feel stiffer to play, and when I play, you know, I can feel some resistance there. And if you're used to playing some like 5-string boutique super sleek thing with roundwounds on it, this is going to feel completely different. But there's something which is just right about the fat P-Bass neck and the higher tension of flatwound strings. And you could say it's harder to play, but actually what it does is make you dig in a different way, which is how you get a lot of those authentic kind of more classic sounds from a P-Bass. You know, it's as much about your playing style with a P-Bass as it is the instrument itself. So getting that authentic feel is part of getting the authentic sound. The other thing to say about the feel though is just how smooth flatwounds are. So running your fingers up and down like that, you really won't feel any friction like you do with roundwounds, and playing slides, you know, that's effortless. And so whilst in one sense they might feel a bit stiffer to play, there's a big plus point in that the feel is just so much smoother. And that leads us nicely into point 4 on the list, which is noise. And because the strings have got such a smooth surface, there's a lot less finger noise. So listen to this clip of me with roundwounds on my jazz bass and you'll see how much noise there is. So you can hear that, you know, that scratchy sound, you get that when you move your fingers around the fretboard. You know, you can hear all that finger noise as I move up and down. And now with the P-Bass, you know, I can run my fingers up and down like that and there's virtually nothing that's going to come through whilst I'm playing. Now, when you combine the fact that there's so little finger noise with the fact that this split coil pickup on a P-Bass gives out so little hum, what you get is a setup which is overall really, really quiet in the studio and gives out a really clean signal for recording. And that's a big reason why the P-Bass has been like the #1 most recorded instrument for so many decades. So now on to number 5 then, and that is that flatwounds sound really great with some foam in the bridge. Now this is one of the quickest, easiest, cheapest things that you can do to get a whole new bass sound. All I've done here is chop up a washing up sponge and stick it under the strings near the bridge, and then it's instant Motown vibes. And what it does is it kind of deadens the note, takes some of the sustain away, but it also increases the attack, the transient on the front of the note. And what that does is give a sound that cuts really well in the mix without having to add lots of top to it. Now, players like Bob Babbitt were really famous for doing this, and so for the sake of a few minutes chopping up a sponge, it's really worth giving it a go. Of course, you can do it with roundwounds, but if you want that really authentic sound, then flatwounds are the way to go, and it's kind of a perfect combination. So lastly then, number 6 is just how long flatwound strings will last. And I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years plus that some people keep these on their basses. Now for me, with roundwounds, that toppy high end that you get with them can wear out quite quickly, and then you can get into a cycle of always thinking, I need to be replacing my strings. Whereas with flats, you kind of put them on, you break them in, they'll dull down a lot over the first couple of months, but then you just kind of live with them for the rest of their life. Now, if you've got some modern active bass and you want those snappy sounds, then you might have no choice but to keep in that cycle of replacing your roundwounds. But with the P-Bass, you kind of want those deeper, thuddier tones. And actually, a P-Bass is the kind of thing you're going to find one, probably keep it for decades when you find the one you like. And it's quite a nice idea that you put on a set of strings and you let those age with the bass. And obviously you're going to save a ton of money as well by sticking with flatwounds like that. So that brings us to the end of our list, but before we close out, I just want to talk about which strings I'm using and give a couple of tips, because with flatwounds it really does make a difference which ones you buy. So these here are Fender, and I like them for 2 reasons. Firstly, the price. So I paid about 25 quid on eBay, which I know sounds a lot compared to roundwounds, but for flats, it's really pretty decent value for money. A lot of people like Labellas because that's what James Jamerson played, but those can be 50 or 60 quid for a set. So 25 is really not too bad, and they're really decent quality. The other thing is the tension. They don't have too much tension. Before I had rotor sounds and they were verging on unplayable for me, and my truss rod really hated me for it. So these I find a good balance of not too tense, good value for money, overall a really good option if you want to get into flatwounds. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. For now I'm going to jam out and I'll see you on the next one.